Last but not least, on the panel tonight is Mr. Michael Balboni, Deputy Secretary for Public Safety. Governor Eliot Spitzer appointed Michael Balboni as Deputy Secretary for Public Safety in January of 2007. Mr. Balboni is the administration's senior Homeland Security and law enforcement official. A sampling of the state agencies which report to him are the Office of Homeland Security, Division of State Police, Division of Military and Naval Affairs, Department of Correction Services, Division of Criminal Justice Services, and the State Emergency Management Office. Prior to accepting this appointment, Michael Balboni represented the 7th Senate District located in Nassau County since 1997. Previously, he served in the State Assembly for 8 years. In the Senate, he chaired the Committee on Veterans, Homeland Security, and Military Affairs, where he led the enactment of several new anti-terrorism laws in New York State that criminalize acts of biological and chemical terrorism, set up security requirements for all small airports, and established procedures for securing chemical plants against terrorist attacks. In March 2004, then Federal Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge appointed then Senator Balboni to a national task force that examined the flow of Homeland Security dollars from the federal government to local communities. In 2005, he was named a senior fellow of the Homeland Security Policy Institute at George Washington University and was appointed co-chairman of the Executive Task Force on Homeland Security of the National Conference of the State Legislators. In 2006, Senator Balboni was appointed to the State and Local Official Senior Advisory Committee of the United States Homeland Security Advisory Council. In that role, he helps to leverage the ingenuity and expertise of state, local, and tribal leaders to provide Federal Advisory Council members with the best possible advice on a range of Homeland Security issues. He was also appointed a member of the Board of Advisors of the Homeland Security Management Institute of the Long Island University. Mr. Balboni.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your fortitude, if nothing else. I bring greetings from Eliot Spitzer and from your sister city in New York. And when I mean sister city, I mean sister city. I mean, just the other day, an Irish-American friend of mine was complaining that he had to schlep all over the city. And then he was joined by an Italian-American friend who said, "What, you're kvetching about your schlepping?" And then, of course, my priest always, when he spills the wine on him, says, "Oy vey," in the great Catholic tradition. We have this wonderful interconnection of cultures, but unfortunately we also have the interconnection when it comes to terrorism. Now, I am probably the most unique person here from the standpoint that I've never been a fireman, a police officer, a soldier, a first responder. I'm not an academic in the sense of doing research. I am a politician. And my message to you today is that there is a huge disconnect in most of our governments between the people who are charged with the responsibility of protecting our societies and the people who view them through the prism of public policy and, most importantly, appropriations. Let me give you my, yeah, there's a real disconnect. If you don't have the money to pay for the program, it doesn't work. And that's one of the greatest challenges and dangers I see right now. How do we sustain this mission? How do we continue to get the public and the political processes invested in our efforts? Now, let me give you my credentials. What are my credentials? I was a state senator on the morning of September 11th, 2001. My district is right next to New York City, and on that day, I was teaching a class at a university when the planes hit, and little did I know that I would lose a great number of friends. In fact, 3 of my friends who I played basketball with every single Sunday never got out of the towers. And almost as a constant reminder for me, the district that I represented was particularly hard hit. And the most enduring image that I wake up to every morning is that of the Manhasset train station, which sat with 20 cars for weeks and weeks and weeks because their owners just got up and went to work and never came back. And that was such a profound moment for not only for this district but for America. And what came of that was this recognition the next day of, oh my God, we're not ready. And we had to take national defense and make it hometown security, which means we had to take cops and firemen and EMTs, and we had to make them first preventers from first responders. So we went to firemen and we said, here's a rad pager. And they looked at us and said, what the hell is a rad pager, and why do I need this? We went to hospitals and we said, it's not just about being able to handle the trauma of a school bus being hit in an automobile accident. It is the trauma potential of a smallpox virus unleashed on the society. And what we realized was that in this rush to prepare the society in a way that it had never thought it would need to be before, we left people behind, the very people we were supposed to protect. We have had a great failure when it comes to Homeland Security in America, and that is to message with the American public and to have a mature dialogue that talks in realistic terms about what risk is. What is the expectation, not just for tomorrow, but for the next decade and the decades that follow for our children and our grandchildren. And what we are doing by failing to have that discussion is we are playing into the hands of those small groups that wish to put in their asymmetrical warfare way a tyranny on us that we are unable to shake off. I have worked through political campaigns now. I've run for office myself 13 times, lost once. I have worked on a variety of different campaigns. I have seen public opinion polls. I've crafted messages for campaign strategies. And what I know is this. If you don't tell people what you're doing, they assume you're doing nothing. If you don't give people information, even if it is we don't know at this point, but we will know soon, then they will not believe you when you come back to them later. And if you try to say things in a way that frightens people for political gain, then you will lose your legitimacy. And that is right now where we're at in the United States. I believe from the briefings that I have received, as you've heard today, that we are in an unparalleled moment of danger. And the danger is multifaceted. Yes, as the National Intelligence Estimate came out in the United States, there is a reconstitution of Al-Qaeda, Pakistan. There is this urban guerrilla warfare laboratory in Iraq, and whether or not that technology and training will be exported to Europe or the United States remains to be seen, but I think that's probably a sure bet. We do have the global jihadist phenomena where people are willing to travel all over the world at a moment's notice and perpetuate acts in the name of jihadist philosophy. And we do have homegrown terrorism, things that are so hard to predict because it comes literally out of nowhere from the radicalization process. But that's only part of the threat. The other part of the threat is malaise and the inability to want to see past tomorrow when it comes to security. Now, it's interesting, I've been watching this group all day long, and it's such a fascinating mix of industry and people who are in charge of protecting societies, academics, and people who really are very concerned about how do you protect modern-day civilization. But what's interesting is the people who are missing here, who I really wish could be here, the editorial board of the New York Times. I'm serious. The Washington Post. I'd love to see their owners sitting up here. I'd love to see the LA Times editorial board here. We really have that disconnect between the media and the message. And I see this time and time again. Recently I think it was the beginning of June, I got a phone call. I was at a gathering, a party with a bunch of my neighbors. And it said that, okay, we got the guys for the JFK bombing. We'd been following this now for a year and a half. And what was amazing about this, nobody ever talks about it, for a year and a half, the FBI was conducting a joint operation with the NYPD following these guys that were going to plan to blow up the fuel tanks at JFK, and not one leak. Not one leak. You never hear about that. Tight as a drum. In fact, it was the first case that I was briefed on when I came into this office. And so on a Saturday morning, we went in and we went to the FBI headquarters, and there were 20 2 TV cameras, an enormous media presence, zoomed out to the entire globe. And now, was this a plot that was going to happen the next day? No. Was this a plot that was going to become operational anytime soon? No. And lastly, was it a plot that really could have worked? But it was so hyped up that you would have expected that they caught the guys walking into JFK with the satchels in hand, or that they planted the plastique and were about to light it. That's not what happened. And so there's one example of how it's so incredibly hyped up. And frankly, some of the comments that came out of the press conference were, they played right into this. That's part of the cynicism. But then on the other side, if you take a look, since 2005, there have been 9 plots that have been disrupted, including the JFK International Overseas plot, the Fort Dix plot, the Miami plot, the plot in Georgia. All these plots have been disrupted. What is the response of the media? Well, did you protect their rights? Did you take the time to make sure that they were really going to do this? Now, I'm a big U.S. constitutional fan. Okay, I believe in all of the protections. But hang on a second. Is this the prism of cynicism through which we are going to look at law enforcement? And what does that do to the overall expectation of the people we are supposed to be serving and protecting? The most difficult thing here is when you talk about the different pieces, like, for example, the Fusion Center. I mean, that was a terrific presentation. Georgia does have a great Fusion Center. I'd like to think ours is pretty good, too. But intelligence is such a difficult thing to sustain. Think about it. If you're going to vote on a budget, and you're going to expend money, and it's always the guns and butter equation. And so instead of giving teachers a raise, or doing health care for women, you're going to give money to an intelligence center that is supposed to provide information to law enforcement to prevent terrorism from happening. What is the deliverable that you can point to from the intelligence side? What is the piece of paper or the investigation or the photograph of the person being arrested that you can actually show to the public? There isn't any. Oftentimes it is totally background and behind the scenes. And yet, as Israel knows better than any other nation on earth, if you don't have a seamless, robust intelligence network that has been set up and designed to work 24/7, then you are open and vulnerable. So as we go 6 years past 9/11, and hopefully another 6 years without a major attack, how do we continue to sustain the funding? How do we continue to sustain the support? I'm here to tell you, unless we change our messaging, and unless we wake up and realize we must engage our public, and we must engage the private sector, then we are going to lose this war through attrition and complacency. I'm absolutely convinced of that. New York State right now is facing a $3.5 to $4 billion budget deficit. My budget is $5 billion. I've been told I should probably take a look at a couple of $100 million in cuts across a public safety spectrum. You want to know how hard that's going to be? Particularly in light of Germany. And, the thing about Germany that bothers me the most is that there was a specific timetable reference to 9/11. You hadn't seen that before. In fact, most of the plots that we've seen, most of the threats have not been date sensitive to anniversaries. There is numerology involved, but wasn't date sensitive to anniversaries. So now it begins us thinking, well, has the timetable changed? Will they be coming back? And will it be coming back to New York? And this is the environment in which I'm supposed to cut this amount of money from my public safety? It's an enormous challenge. But then there is the other side to it. And that is that, when you think about it, what is the end state? We're all here to protect the people that we've been assigned to protect, but what is our end state? We know we can't truly make everybody safe. We know we can't end terrorism by defending it or trying to kill everybody. It's just not going to work. So what about the other messaging? Not just to the public, not just to the private sector, but what about to the adversaries? What have we done in terms of outreach? What are we doing in terms of trying to understand the motivations? And people say, what are you talking about? Why should we do that? Because we need to change the dialogue. Because otherwise, we will lose this equation. For them, small numbers, not a lot of money, big effect. For us, huge numbers, a lot of money, and always on defense. So what we ought to be doing is hitting back, not just militarily, but informationally. We should be targeting the folks who say that violence is an okay form to move forward their agenda. We should isolate them with ideas. We should go out there in the media and make sure that everybody understands that it was the Salafist view that came to power in the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And explore that regime with people every day to remind them that this could be the reality if we let them win. Because otherwise, it is just about fear, it is just about defense, and it's just about trying to get through to the next day. And that is absolutely no way to sustain the mission. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very unique opportunity to work with some of the most professional and gifted people from all levels of government. And I will tell you this, the last piece of the message that's missing is how easy it is for legislators, politicians, and the media to simply take the professionals for granted. And what I found out is until you actually send an officer into a home where there's a weapon, until you actually deploy troops in harm's way, or until you actually try to design a system to prevent a catastrophe from happening, then you don't really know what the connection is. We need to change that. So the last messaging is the messaging to the folks in Congress, in the state legislatures, and in the local legislatures. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.